All right, so it's 6:34, and we have a quorum. So I'd like to go ahead and call us to order at 6:34, Tiffany. Are there any public participants this evening?
No citizen forum.
Okay. So going through the agenda, the first order of business is to approve the meeting minutes from the October 5 meeting. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve those minutes?
Move to approve those minutes.
Patrick, any second?
I second.
Okay. Okay,
so all in favor?
Sorry.
Okay.
Sure.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Those minutes. All right. Okay, so going through the agenda then, we first of all wanted to talk about the city council meeting or working session that occurred on, let's see, it was last Tuesday, right? October 27th. And who on the board was able to watch the live feed? Patrick? Yeah. So I thought it was a good meeting. I think during this past week, I think we've, kind of gotten some feedback on the meeting. And Jared, do you want to start us off and kind of tell us a bit about what you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it was, I think they were a bit blown away with how much work has been completed. They were really impressed with the detail that was there. They were impressed. Wes asked a really good question. It was a detailed question. Jeff, you did a good job responding. And at the end of the day, everybody was very, very complimentary to the work that we've all been doing. And I mean, I really think we impressed them is what I would say. That would say overall takeaway from my perspective.
Yeah, good.
I would agree with that, Jeff. The thing that struck me was that they were very pleased with the quality of the work and the type of work and the depth of the work. I think that you actually exceeded their expectations tremendously. So you did a great job, and the board's done a great job putting that together.
Oh, good. It's good feedback.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it went well. I thought the questions asked by the council members were they clearly are very engaged, very interested in what the Smart City Board is doing. So they had some very good exploratory type of questions. There was one of the council members at the end before the council went to the next agenda item. She said, "I knew it was the right thing to start a Smart City Board." So I kind of felt like that was a nice little summation point. It kind of says these board members are going in the direction that we'd like for them to go. And so I felt like it was a very good kind of confirmation that we are doing the work that the city council has asked us to do. So it was good. Todd, do you have any thoughts you want to throw in there?
I got to see a number of city council members and Vicky and Mike and Karen the Thursday night afterwards at another event, and got really great feedback. Jeff, I know you saw this, and Jared, you did too, but I had emailed Mike to make sure that he passed along the names of everybody that was on the board to everybody internally and also the city council. So so that everybody knows who's working on that. But yeah, absolutely impressed. I think that they're a little surprised how far the board has gotten, quite honestly. And I think that we are really on the right track. And, Jared and Vicky, really appreciate, you guys coaching all of us to get to this point, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, the last thing I'll say is that was, I felt bad. I did not have the list of all the council members in front of me, and that was the last question that was asked, and I felt bad because I was quickly trying to find it, and Jeff was kind of put on the spot, and we ended up moving right on. But that's why Todd followed up. I appreciate that, Todd, for following up with Mike and making sure that everybody got everybody's info out there. So
good. Any questions? Any other comments? Yeah, I will say on the names thing, I thought about that before the meeting. I kind of stood on protocol because I felt like I didn't want to go out and change the content on the slides without, I feel like if you change the content on the slides, it's got to go back through the board for approval for those content changes. So I kind of stood on protocol and didn't do that. I should have added everybody's names, but Todd did get all that out there very early the next morning. So that got out in front of all the city council members. So
a quick question, was there any questions for us? Anything that they expected to see that they were not seeing?
there wasn't any questions of that nature, Ramesh. I thought Wes Mays asked a really good question. I do think we've got a bead on the on his question, responding to his question. But his question essentially was, anything like this represents a transformation, and anytime you're going through a transformation, there's risk involved. So how do you make sure that the transformation that you're recommending be pursued will actually end up the way you think, the way you want? And how will you reduce risk that's associated with that transformation? That's the way I took Wes's question, and which is obviously a very good question. I do think we've got a beat on that, but it's something you always kind of have to be diligent about. I would say that the scenario planning that we've discussed is one mechanism for doing that, and it's a lot easier to assess the risk. I believe that it's a lot easier to assess the risk of something once you kind of write down a scenario that's associated with it, and then everybody's able to look at it and explore that scenario and explore what it means. And then it's kind of like if we were to say, well, the scenario that we're going to respond to is that all the residents of Coppell will drive electric vehicles by the end of next year. So the city better have 6 charging stations for every square quarter mile, let's say, in the city. Let's go out and invest in that infrastructure and let's go do it. If we were to say that, and if we were to write that down and say that that's the scenario we were pursuing as a smart city, I'm sure everybody would be able to look at that and say that's incredibly risky, and everybody would easily be able to say that scenario shouldn't be accepted because of the risk associated with it and the cost of doing something like that. So I think by moving forward, developing the scenario, talking about what that transformation means, we'll be able to assess that risk. And then the second thing is you would probably do something like, in fact, you would put, let's say if you thought you had to have 6 charging stations per square quarter mile, and you needed a 65% capacity utilization on them to justify them, you wouldn't just go out and just build out Coppell. You build one neighborhood with 6 charging stations, and you'd test and you'd see, do I get 65% capacity on this or not, before you went and did it. So our answer was essentially that you have to look at the trends, use scenario planning to assess risk, and then you have to prototype, which Ramesh, you brought up, I think, in probably one of our first meetings, and test before moving forward to assess a risk. So that was, I thought, a really good question that Wes asked.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on that topic? Okay, so the essence of the These next
Hey,
couple of
hey,
yeah,
Jeff,
yeah,
can I interrupt you real quick? I think Aaron has joined us on the phone. He was texting me. Aaron, have you joined us, bud? You're on mute if you're talking, by the way, Aaron, but we see you on the phone. So Jeff, just FYI.
oh,
He,
okay.
he's on. Yeah, Aaron. Just if you want to unmute, you want to hit *6. Okay.
Okay, so let's have a bit of a discussion here. I think just to, build a little bit of a context here, we made some recommendations to the city council, and our recommendations really are two groupings of recommendations. One grouping is the foundational elements of a smart city. The 4 recommendations associated with that, and then the other grouping is the portfolios. And in talking a bit about the foundational elements, Jared was talking about what he's doing now to sort of socialize those foundational elements with the city leaders and the department leaders, and to kind of move forward in assessing just what it means to move forward with those foundational elements. And I was really impressed with the process that Jared's kind of started or getting started on. So Jared, I just want to give you a chance to kind of talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, when we talk about portfolio management at the city level from a staff perspective, it really is going to impact all of the departments and therefore all the leaders. And so what I've done is I've shared it with all of the directors. My intent is to meet with them in one of our executive sessions or executive meetings where we just go through it and we'll talk about what it is, what the foundation looks like, what the framework is, how did we get to that, and then start talking about the portfolios, and then really the higher level, what is the philosophy of portfolio management? Because I think as an organization, we don't necessarily label it that. So it's going to be a little bit of a naming exercise, but when we collectively work on budget and we work on projects, we are taking into account some of the same kind of high level kind of evaluation, but really it's taking it to that level of understanding what we mean when we say the portfolio related to X. How does that impact your department? So as we go forward, what is that going to look like for you? And so that's really my goal. And it'll be kind of it's an initial conversation. And then following that, my goal for the group is that as we move forward, they're going to reflect back at some point back on that portfolio. We were doing some work in X, whether it's traffic management or water or whatever it is we decide we're working towards. We will reflect back to kind of that portfolio mindset when we establish that project going forward, if that makes sense. We do it at a high level with the 2040. So for example, every agenda item that goes before council has a pillar associated to it. So it's just an icon that's attached to that agenda item. So from a high level, council can quickly look at it and see that it does tie back to the 2040 goals. Similarly, I want to do something similar with those portfolios that we've identified with the staff. And so I haven't had that conversation yet with the staff, but I have shared the deck with them. And I hope to get that in front of them and have a discussion around it. Sorry about that.
Jared, I know your four-legged family member wants to chime in. So while you're on mute, my question to you is, I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. Are you talking about your portfolio management plan to start executing some of the ideas that we discussed in the Smart City Board, or are you talking about your current 2030 plan?
So we've put 2030 to bed, but my goal from a 2040 perspective, as I start to forecast out, I'm not going to necessarily execute what we've landed on in that in a portfolio or what we think we're, going to land on there. It is more of a mindset that, okay, we need to be thinking about it from that broader view. And so as we budget and as we start to forecast our projects going into the future, we need to keep those in our minds as we go forward. If that makes sense.
Right. So in other words, you're educating us that to go from vision to execution, we need to be aware of how you do things, correct?
Right. So that's the nuts and bolts of it. Yeah. I mean, we've done a really good job on the board here coming up with these concepts in the portfolio management solution, or viewing it from a portfolio management scenario.
Got it.
Is good, and we just need to make sure that everybody in the organization, from a director down, understands where that fits into how we go forward.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could just sort of remind everybody of these foundational elements that we recommended real quick, to extend the city's technology strategy to account for smart city challenges, to select and deploy a citizen engagement platform that supports open data initiatives, public education, collaborative problem solving. Three, to establish an innovation hub driven by design, research, and prototyping, intended to test and reduce the risk of smart city solution adoption. 4, to move from standalone project management to portfolio management so that the city is positioned to manage the complexity of deploying smart city solutions over multiple years. And then 5, but this is later, as efforts to define data for collection and capture, store, and manage this data matures, to consider creating a Coppell Data Privacy Commission. So my view of these things, I heard Jared speaking now and speaking, I don't know when we were talking on a follow-up from the city council meeting or something, but he was talking about these foundational elements, and he was talking about the process that, to me, he was talking about the process that he needed to go through to socialize these things, to work with the department heads and kind of get everybody on the same page in terms of what they mean, what they are and what they mean. And what kind of impressed me was that there's a certain process here that the city has to go through to take these recommendations in, to understand what they mean, maybe to go get, there could be parts of city staff that may need to maybe get some training on some of the concepts, et cetera. And what impressed me was that that's something that's going to take a bit of time. And I'm speaking for myself here, not for the board, of course, but for myself, I feel like, well, whatever that time is, take that time and come back, at some future date in 2021 and give us an update on that. That to me is appropriate, but I want to make sure that the city has time on these foundational elements to really, think them through, understand them, socialize them, figure out what kind of process is best to come back to the board and say, okay, here's how we're thinking the best way to move forward on these recommendations is. Again, I just, for me personally, whatever the time frame for that is what it is. But I think that we've got to let that process mature and give Jared as our liaison time to work that.
I mean, at the end of the day, it really is exactly what you said. We're socializing this across the executive group, and so that way they understand where we're coming from when we start to have a smart city conversation, going forward.
Does that make sense to everybody? Any issues with that thinking and approach? Okay, so let's move to the third item. I'm sorry, to the next item. And let's talk about next steps for the board. If next steps on those foundational elements is to work those properly with the proper amount of time, if you will, through the city, then the next step for the board, I think, is to be very focused on the portfolios, to really, I guess, double down on the whole idea of being futurists and work through and add articulation to these portfolios. So I wanted to have an open discussion about that. In sort of thinking through that process, I've got some ideas about what we might do to further articulate these portfolios. Before I do that, though, I just want to open things up and say, does anybody have any thoughts that they want to share about what's next for the board before I kind of jump into these ideas? I wouldn't want to cut anybody off from saying, hey, Donaldson, shut up for a minute and let me talk about what I think we ought to do next.
Well, I hate silences, so I'll jump in and go first. I'm sure others will add. So I'm working under the assumption that as a smart city board, our focus should be on the high level visionary stuff, futurist stuff, and not get involved in the implementation of the idea. So as I see our role, whether it's for a 1 year or 2 year term, I think we should do a mini cycles of looking at what new trend do we see happening? Does that apply to Coppell City? Where should that trend fall in the big portfolios that we have? So those are my thoughts, and I'll stop there.
Jeff, I was going to just share, Ramesh, to your point, I was just going to share my screen real quick back to what you presented and what the board presented to City Council. And Ramesh, I think to your point of ultimately what our role is, and I think that ongoing to operate as futurists, looking ahead. Jared did mention that they put Jared, I think you said that they put 2020 to bed. Basically it's like, wow, the city's done such a great time. It's time to all focus go on 2040. And I think that's a big role of what we're doing. And in fact, I think we all as a board, we hit a couple of roadblocks where, as we were trying to determine, how far out do we think? Are we thinking far enough? So I think it's a really, really good point, Ramesh, of staying to the future. I go back to this slide, Jeff, that we presented, and I think that if we talk about who's got a really, really tough job ahead of them, and Jared, I think it's you, because we have to help you, but I think this is the slide that we need to somehow figure out how to help you in whatever ways you need to message this internally. And we obviously have a responsibility to help message this to citizens as well, of like what the next step is. Because this slide alone, think about how much hours and how much brain power went in from the board to get here. We have to figure out how to explain this. What does this mean? What are the next steps, right? So I kind of go back to that as just thinking about how, Jared, how can we be of service to you? How can we be of service to the city council to explain that, to stay forward thinking is where my head goes.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is, at the end of the day, this is going to be, the work that I will be doing for however long I'm in Coppell, most likely. So getting clarity on, kind of some of that is going to be huge selling points for me, to be able to explain to, other folks. I mean, I'm including other entities in Coppell. That's the other, I've been talking quite a bit with the school district lately, and having to explain kind of what we've been focusing on here with what the work that they're doing. So making sure we have clarity around it, I think is huge. So I think for me, that's, there's a lot of meat there, And so getting it to a place where you guys are comfortable with what that looks like, and clarity about what, defining those in a little bit more in depth, I think, per portfolio. And then for me, taking it and selling it and then rolling it into the work that I'm doing. Really, that's where I see it.
Jeff, can I add one more thing? Something that Todd mentioned, I thought was really important. My belief is that the city leaders formed this citizen committee because they wanted, first of all, the citizens of Coppell to feel like they have a say in what is being done. And I think one of their agenda is that we act as ambassadors to take this message out to the rest of Coppell citizens. So if we come up with a smart city vision in a slide or two, and if we start socializing, I think we will be doing one of the things that the leaders want us to do.
Yeah, and that's what I think that message is. If we have the same message, we're selling the same thing. So people are hearing the same thing over and over again.
So the three things that I just heard is, one, whatever process we follow here through 2021, we should make sure that within that process that we go back and do sort of mini reviews of trends, spend time on new trends, understand if there's anything new going on, new to consider from a smart city perspective, and update our knowledge and update our deck accordingly. If something new comes up, new information comes up that might, add to the strategy or alter the strategy in some way, the vision, I should say, rather than strategy. That's number one. Did I get that right, Ramesh? Two, whatever process we adopt, we need to make sure there's places within that process where we help with the messaging. We help Jared with any messaging that he might ask us to provide, that we help with messaging to the city council. Any explanation of the framework, any explanation of the vision, any explanation of a particular portfolio, that we help with the messaging around that. Todd, did I get that right?
I think so. I just would add even the external also, which I think you were headed to, like
Yes.
the citizens.
Yes, and then I heard number three is within the process, act as ambassadors, take the vision to the citizens. Maybe have a standard deck that we all have in our back pocket. We can use it anytime. Wish it wasn't the era of COVID, because getting together physically with people and being able to talk through this would be great. But we can find other ways. But those are the three things that I heard to make sure that we account for within the process going forward. Anything else? So I think that if you could bear with me a little bit here, I think that articulating the 6 portfolios that we agreed on and that we defined, articulating them at a bit of a deeper level is important. And I put some thought into what does it mean to do that. From the perspective of if I were I don't know, I mean, any of us at our companies, when we're in charge of developing a strategy, there's these things that we do. We might develop scenarios. We may look at what kind of a transformation is required within our organizations. We identify transformation initiatives for those organizations. We identify metrics. We may do use case development. We may do some kind of design research with customers to understand in more detail how to kind of fill out these portfolios. But I feel like as a citizen board, those are not things that's reasonable for us to pull off. And so I was asking myself, well, what would a citizen board create in order to help move forward on these portfolios? And luckily, I was reading about, anybody read about this? There's an issue, there's 9 North Texas cities that have some sort of an issue with the municipal water rates. And it's a fight, a relatively heated sort of debate and fight going on between these 9 cities. And so to solve the problem, you know, the cities probably get their water from a similar source or the same source, but they have all these different rates. Some people pay more for the, you know, some people use more water, pay less. And there's real concern over this. So these 9 cities put a citizen board together. And the citizen board worked on this, you know, talked it through, and they came up with the actions that they wanted those city governments to take, these 9 city governments to take in order to resolve the issue. And there's some level of transformation that's associated with it. And what they did was, as they studied it, they created what I just kind of started calling, they created statements, bullet points, and they were over and by statements. So in order to explain and communicate to city government what they wanted, they created statements that started with over the next or by a certain date or a certain year. So they said, well, over the next 2 years, we would like all of these cities to create a database of everybody's water usage and the rate per gallon that they pay for that water. And then the next step was, by 2025, we want the cities to agree on rates that are harmonized on this database between the cities. Then by 2032, they had a list of things, so that these things are requests that they're making of the city government, so that the city government can then turn around and say, okay, this is what the citizens are wanting, and so we'll figure out how to respond to these things. And so when I was thinking about that, it seems to me that that's sort of the perfect thing to do on these portfolios, is to go through a process where we can list bullet items for each portfolio and make a request of city government and say, over the next 2 years, we would like, and then make a statement about that. By 2035, make a statement like that. Of course, what the specifics of it would depend on the portfolio. But as I thought through this, and I thought through the process, my feeling is that over the next 6 or 7 months, what I believe what we should do is to go through a process where one of us sort of takes the lead on a conversation, a discussion per portfolio. And for each portfolio, we should create 3 things. One is we should, maybe just 3 slides. One is the data that sort of inspires us or informs us on what is most important to consider on a portfolio. So for climate change, we may list things like Shell Oil has, and this is true, Shell Oil has forecasted their business around their projection that oil demand will start to drop in 2028. So we used to talk about peak supply, and the oil companies no longer talk about peak supply. Now they talk about peak demand. So there are some sources where it is believed that peak demand of oil in the world will come as soon as 2024. But I Shell's done some really interesting work on this and believe that peak demand is in 2028. So so we would list that as an interesting fact that is part of what we're considering when we establish actions that are associated with climate change. As an example, how would peak oil demand happen in 2028? Well, it would happen because conservation for buildings. I think Patrick mentioned something about building standards in one of our meetings. Well, as building standards go in place and conservation occurs, you use less and less of electricity, and so you have natural gas fired power plants that use less natural gas, and so that oil product, if you will, is less from a demand perspective. You have more electric cars, so some projections are I think it's by 2040, a third of the cars on the road will be electric cars. I may be off on that. It may be as high as 50%. But these are all facts that might inspire us to ask for a particular transformation from our city government. So I think for each portfolio, it'd be great if we could produce three things. Number one, data that we get through research that inspires us to move forward and ask for a specific transformation. The second thing would be just a simple statement of transformation for that portfolio. So maybe something like this, and it would be, for many of these portfolios, it'd be more than one transformational statement, but I think we should make them relatively simple so they all fit on one slide. But for example, on the example I just used, we may say that we want to transform the city's infrastructure since it's believed that peak demand for oil is 2028, and as many as 1/3 to 50%. I've got this stat somewhere, but let's use 50%. Over the 12 years after 2028, as much as 50% of the vehicles driven in Coppell would be electric. Because Coppell is an affluent community, I would say that's probably going to be higher than what the prediction is for the world overall. But we would make a certain statement there and then say, we think that there's a infrastructure transformation that the city ought to undertake. And we'd like to see by 2035, we would like to see X number of public power stations for these electric vehicles, as an example. So the second slide would be the transformational statement that we would make given data that's inspiring to us in terms of what the future looks like. And then the third slide would be whatever it is that we decide to ask of our city government, but state it as this city board did in North Texas, where the start of the bullet is either over the next 12 months, over the next 18 months, over the next 2 years, whatever the case might be, collect data, or whatever. Perhaps it's something like over the next 2 years, prepare to collect data among the residents on electric car adoption, or something like this. But make these statements starting in year 2035, and then make a statement that goes along with these transformational initiatives that we come up with. And again, bear with me. I'm sorry I'm talking so much here. But as I thought through and I read through what the citizen board did in North Texas, I really think that we can provide some very useful, productive articulation on these portfolios if we move toward creating these three slides, these three deliverables for each of the portfolios. And my thinking on how to do that is, well, first of all, before I go forward and talk process a little bit, what are the thoughts on that?
Jeff, I like it. I have a quick question for Gerard. Gerard, is this along the lines of what you're expecting? Because I still have a little bit of confusion on how much you want the board to be involved in the execution of it.
Yeah, so I feel like I don't necessarily think this is going to be a directive for me coming out of what he just said. I think it's clarity around the work you've already done, more than anything, and kind of taking it to that more scenario planning kind of level, right? We as or you guys as a board have talked about in 2035, for example, we think, the power grid's going to be different. Therefore, Coppell should be considering things, and that's that last statement, I guess Jeff was talking about is, by 2030, Coppell should have invested in a plan that will accommodate potential microgrids or something to that effect, or battery substations, something to that effect. It's not going to direct exactly what I do necessarily in today or the next year, but it's going to give a kind of a high level. We should be thinking this way as we go forward. And so from my perspective, that's how I see this.
Yeah. Right. Thank you for that, Jared. And Jeff, I like what you're suggesting. I think it's a simple, nice 3-step plan. So I like it.
Hey, Jeff, Jeff, what you're proposing, let me say it back to you to see if I heard you correctly. What I think you're proposing is that for each of the 6 portfolios, that we as a board basically try to do 3 things and distill it almost down to 1 slide. That basically says, let's get some data, do research, get data of what's behind, what's underlying of that portfolio. Number 2, almost define the problem that portfolio solves, or maybe said differently, define the opportunity that portfolio expands upon. And then 3, almost have an anecdote of how that's going to affect someone that lives in Coppell. That's a real simple way, but is that similar to what you just said?
Yeah. The only thing, Todd, is when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking about who's the customer for that information, who's the audience for that information, and I'm thinking about city council first. Anything that goes to city council, because after all, our neighbors on city council, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, it's not like they're going to say, okay, you made the request, so we're just going to blindly go forward and do anything you tell, anything you say, right? The city council's got to take a look at it, consider it, and decide which ones are what among those things that are being let's say considered by the board or recommended by the board, which among those do we agree with? Which among those do we think are affordable? Which among those things do we think that city staff can establish public-private partnerships to go after? So it's not like, anything the board comes up with, it's just going to get done, right? So my feeling is it's got to be articulated well enough for that audience, for the city council, so the city council can determine whether or not it's can be done. Does that make sense?
So an elevator pitch to city council of what this massively complicated 6 portfolio proposal is, just like almost, this is what it means.
Right.
So everyone, they can understand it.
Which hopefully won't be as massively complex when it's broken down into 6 well-defined portfolios. Yes.
Yep.
And Ramesh, on your question, I totally hear you on this question, because I've been thinking about it ever since the council meeting, because I feel like the question of why smart city, well, that's been discussed by city council, right? I assume that they've talked about why, because we wouldn't be here unless they talked about why and said, let's start this board. I think our focus has to be what, which we've moved forward with quite nicely. Let's call it phase 1 this year, defining these foundational elements, defining this framework, defining the portfolios to start with. I think what we're talking about here is phase 2, in defining in more detail what on the portfolios in terms of specific transformations that would have to be considered by the city over the next 20 years. But it's still what. Again, when that goes to city council, when that's evaluated by city leaders like Jared and Vicky, for example, it doesn't mean, oh, let's go off and do all this stuff. It means these are reasonable recommendations to be evaluated, because there's deployment, there's tax, there's spending, there's all sorts of things like that. I think our focus should be on the what, though. Then we're well positioned for our city leaders and city council to look at the how and say whether or not it's reasonable to actually pull it off over the next 20 years, which is a different process that I feel like we'll want to know about, but I don't think it's appropriate to be involved in. So I totally hear you on that question. That's the way I've been thinking about it. Does that make sense, Vicky, the way I described it?
Yes, it absolutely does. Just what I'm hearing, I think, is what the council is looking for, is specific go-dos, in the sense of these are the things to be thinking about. These are the things to consider, whether or not that, I mean, you'll be doing the initial data collection, but ultimately that data will be collected and then be evaluated by the organization. And at that point, recommendations would come from staff on how to, as you mentioned, how to achieve those goals. So yes, I think you're on the right path.
Okay, good.
In that sense, you're paralleling something that goes on in a lot of other city boards, where they're bringing ideas and things together of, hey, these are things citizens or people want, either say for the library or for the parks or for something else, and you carry that forward then as a possible option.
Right.
And I think motivating it that way of doing the, hey, we're going to do some of this data digging to see which are the good options out of the possible options that are there. You know, whether the idea comes from one of us or something one of us has seen, or something that Jared or Vicky bring to us and say, hey, this is being considered as an option. We think you guys should look at it, provide some input. I think that as the model probably, and I would sell it as more that kind of model. You started off and gave the analogy for what they did to manage the conflict in the North Texas Municipal Water District. And believe me, you don't want to be in that situation of what happened in that district. And Vicky's
No, we don't.
laughing. She, I think, probably has some idea what's going on with that. The issue there that created the problem of why you had the differential rates was some of the early districts had paid for a lot of the infrastructure. And so they had one set of rate structures. There were other cities that came in later, and we don't have that problem. We're all starting this as equals, right? So I think the better analogy is kind of, you know, what does the library board do, which Vicky, I'm sure, can talk to us about, you know, what does the parks board do? I think that we're following that model.
Okay, good. I'll never use that analogy again.
It's just one I happen to know a fair amount about, because it's a great teaching example, and I'm probably going to use it this spring when I teach students what municipal districts are and how they can really go awry because they don't necessarily line up with the same incentive structures that local governments have. We could have a whole offline conversation about how evil these things can go, but that's a whole different problem.
I did like the way that they came up with these over the next and by a certain year statements to communicate. I did like that. I will never bring it up again, though. Okay, good. Any other comments? So in terms of process, I think we start this January of 2021. However, I would like to see us do kind of a trial, pick a portfolio, do a trial, build a template out of that trial, and then everybody's got a template to use on each of the portfolios as we go through that process in 2021. And I know we can't just have one discussion here and we are all on the same page exactly. So I do think we need a meeting this week, kind of trial the idea. So what I was thinking about is use the December meeting, pick a portfolio, and have the discussion. I'm thinking a couple of us will do prep work for that meeting. We'll have the discussion, and then out of the meeting, after the meeting, we'll produce those 3 slides as a draft. But more importantly, as a template that we can all then look at in January and say, if we like this template, if we like the way that worked, then let's use that for the other portfolios. If we liked 70% of it, but we want to change 30% of what we did there, then we'll change that. But kind of have a trial of it. Then we're off and going in January, and we'll go through each of the portfolios and work them in that manner. What's everybody think of that idea? I'm thinking doing a test run would be good. So what I was thinking is of picking a portfolio, and then in our December meeting, have a discussion about it, and move toward these 3 slides, if you will. And I'm thinking that when we execute on this as we go through 2021, I think it'd be good if we each chose a portfolio and we each were the leader of the discussion and the filling in of the template for the portfolio that we chose. And my thinking is probably a portfolio needs 2, a primary and a secondary. So I think it'd be good if, oh, thanks, Todd. Yeah, so I think it'd be good if we each chose to not lead all of the content creation necessarily, but lead the conversation. And to lead the conversation, it probably means that the data prep before the meeting would be needed to be done by that primary leader on that portfolio. And then I thought if we each choose 2 portfolios, we could be primary on one, secondary on the other. If that's confusing, don't worry too much about it, because we'll do this trial in December, and then I think we'll all be set and understand what we're signing up for when we get to January. But what's everybody think about that? So basically, we'd each choose one of the portfolios that we're really interested in to lead the conversation on, and we choose a second one that we were interested in helping somebody else on. Does that make sense? That way we get, the phase 1 of the Smart City Board was a lot of fun for me. I think this phase 2 is going to be even more fun because we get to dig into the details of these future trends and these topics. How does that sound as an approach?
Good approach.
I like it. I was gonna fill in the silence and beat you, Ramesh. I think it sounds good. I think we all get involved. Choose something we enjoy. I think what's coming is that you're going to ask what we're going to do for December is where we're headed, right?
Well, if here's what I was thinking. I think unless someone wants to take the December meeting, I was thinking I'll choose a portfolio and I'll take the December meeting, but I'd like to ask somebody to help me with data collection. So the thing of it is, I could be really wrong on this, but I think the climate change portfolio might be a little bit easier because I think at the end of the day, I think the Paris Climate Agreement and the commitments, if you will, that are made in that agreement really help a lot in defining those statements for that particular portfolio. So really, if you can go to the Paris Climate Agreement and draw out the objectives associated with it. And I think that might just be the objectives that you associate with that portfolio. Now, there's different ways of achieving those objectives, of course, but I think it might make that one a little bit easier. So I was thinking of maybe doing that one in December. And if someone's interested in doing that with me, that we'll do that in December, again, as a trial. We'll learn any lessons to learn, and then we'll be off and going on January working through these portfolios. Is anyone interested in climate change and would like to jump in on it with me?
Yeah, I am passionate about it. The only problem is I don't know anything about it, so it will be a learning exercise for me.
Perfect.
But I'm glad to be your second chair.
Oh, that sounds great, Ramesh.
Your process, Jeff, by the way, is very similar to what they do at the National Science Foundation when they do reviews. You have the person who's the primary presenter of a project, and then you have the person who's the scribe who they keep all the commentary and the other stuff and help kind of back up the main presentation. But then they also basically take and help incorporate the new feedback back into you.
Okay,
So
good.
You're working with what I know is a good model for evaluation.
Oh, fantastic.
And Jeff, is there an option to democratize this by asking everyone on the board if they have some specific material relevant to this portfolio that they chip in, so that way we're not losing out that knowledge base.
Yeah. Well, let's do. How about this? Let's do two things. One, if anybody per Ramesh's suggestion, per Ramesh's suggestion, if anybody has any research, any data, anything that's useful to fleshing out and further articulating that climate change portfolio, could you email it to me, please? To Ramesh and I. And then the second follow-up, could everybody shoot Todd and I an email and let us know what portfolio are you most interested in leading the discussion on, and what would be your second choice? And then what we'll do is we'll put that together and feed that back to the board. And I think that Todd and I are going to try to put a schedule for 2021 together. So if you could feed us the information on what you're most interested in primary and what you think your secondary one is, then we'll put that on a schedule. That way you can look forward and know when your turn to drive the conversation will come up. And the more time you had to be prepared, the better. So if everybody could do that, that'd be great. Oh, and the other thing is, what we want to do outside the meeting is just coordinate, not deliberate any of the topics, of course. Just coordinate on who's going to, like Patrick is saying, who's going to scribe, who's going to drive conversation, who's going to go out and collect data, and that kind of thing between the primary and the secondary. But no deliberation of any type. We want to save that just for the meetings, the board meetings themselves.
Yeah, as a reminder, just remember that to not email in groups of 4, because that will be a quorum.
Okay.
So if we could get an email by the end of the week, so Tiffany, if everyone could email Jeff and I, so that just groups of 3, right?
Yep.
Send your one that you're most passionate about, and then maybe your secondary one, or even if you want to rank them, it doesn't matter. But if we could get those by end of week, by Friday, then we can flesh it out from there if that would work for everybody.
And then Todd and I will publish that for the December meeting, and we won't put it in stone until we're able to meet again. Everybody can look it over, and if anybody wants to make any changes, they'll have the opportunity to do that. Okay, anything else on that discussion? Okay.
So Jeff,
Yeah.
just thinking big picture. So we would technically be going through these and through, I guess maybe June. We basically would be done with this kind of portfolio. What are we going to call this process? The simplification of portfolio discussion. I mean, something, but we'll finish that by June. Is that the ultimate goal that we're shooting for?
I think it is. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. I actually think that it'll take 2 board meetings to get to a point where we're comfortable with the statements that we're making for a portfolio. I don't think we can do it in 1. I think it'll take 2. I also think that as we do it, there's, I think that we'll say, well, this data we have is good, but it seems like something's missing. And I think that we'll end up saying, who could we get as a speaker to the board to fill in the gaps of our data? And so, given that, yeah, I think it'll be a process that will take a good 6-7 months, But I think we're talking about something that is the beginning of a planning process that's gonna help the city with smart city decisions over the next 20 years. So if it takes 6-7 months, I think that's okay. In fact, that's probably aggressive. But
So
yeah,
Jared,
I'm thinking
sorry. I was just going to say, Jared, so maybe Jared and Vicky. So if by summer of 2021, the Smart City Board is able to come back and help City Council and maybe even help you, Jared, of understanding what these 6 portfolios are in the simplified fashion backed up by data, that sounds like a pretty big rock. That sounds like a good thing for us to put together and to focus on for the next half of the year, maybe a little farther. Does that solve? Is that a good use of our time, big picture, Jared, for you and Vicky?
I will say yes. I think a lot of things will come from these discussions and what you guys put together. One, it is that marketing message that'll come out of that. Being able to use those slides to talk to any one of those portfolios will be great. But then 2, I think along the way, maybe we need more information, and you guys, based on what you find in the conversation, and say, Jared, maybe we need some more. We need to find some dollars to do a consultant to do a research in the next 5 years on this, whatever this is. And I think from my perspective, that would be helpful to start to, if there's anything that's going to come out of these conversations that's fiscal in nature, or I'm going to need to hire somebody or do something, I need to know and plan for it. And so to me, I think we'll start to flesh some of that out as we get into it. But yeah, so I'm supportive of this. I think this is going to be great. I think it'll also help. You could hand I would think you would be able to hand this to the council. They could go and talk on any one of these topics with those 3 slides and actually be meaningful conversations for folks. So I think that's good. It helps.
good. Thanks, Jared. Okay.
Jeff, I was going to say too, that timing wise, that's a good time frame for council to start looking at some of those things and maybe setting some priorities so that in the next budget cycle, we start looking at the things that it would be priorities for us to work on. So I think that is a good time schedule. And even if it goes into August, July, August, that's still a good time frame.
Okay, good.
Vicky, is there typically like a city council or a city leader retreat in July, that time frame? I was trying to think if this is our North Star, is there like some deadline that we want to try to hit, I just didn't know if there was one of those leadership meetings happening in the summer.
Well, council does a retreat in January every year. And I'm trying to think if they do a second one, because if we didn't do it this year. It's just been too much COVID stuff going on. But there's always opportunity to call workshops. We do Fifth Tuesday workshops, and this is the kind of thing that we would frequently bring to those meetings. So whenever there's a Fifth Tuesday, there's going to be an opportunity for that.
Cool.
Good. Any other questions or comments? So moving on to the next item, Jared, we will the board will sync up on primary and secondary, if you will, on these portfolios. But we will get some new board members next year. Is that right?
January. Yeah, that's where we're at now.
Okay.
They get sworn in. I want to say, is that the December? Yeah, December, and then
December.
they'll be ready for us on the first meeting in January.
Okay. So we'll do our best to account for that. Okay, good. We are at the end of our items. Are there any new anything new to bring up, or any additional comments? Okay. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
When is our next meeting? Before we do that, Jeff, Tiffany, do you happen to have that by chance? I just put you on the spot. I apologize for that.
December 7th is what I've got.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it's December 7th.
December 7th. Okay. I'm going to assume that everybody is cool with that date. No conflicts, no problems. Okay. Okay. So next meeting, December 7th. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. And do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Okay, fantastic. Good meeting. Thank you, everybody. Hey, by the way,
The time is 7:40.
the time is 7:41 here, Tiffany.
Okay,
I got
7:41.
I just real quick, I do want to say, I hope that everybody takes a victory lap on this phase 1 of the smart board. Good job done by everybody. I was really pleased with City Council's response to the material. So everybody should please feel very good about that. Everyone did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. Okay, we will see you on December 7th.
Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.